Story 1. I've worked in emergency rooms for 17 years, long enough to know when someone is lying, long enough to tell the difference between shock, trauma, and a story someone rehearsed too many times. People think the scariest part of my job is blood. It isn't. It's memory. Most nights are routine, vitals, charts, names you forget the moment the shift ends. That night was no different, until a man was brought in who didn't know who he was. No ID, no phone, no signs of head trauma. Just calm. Too calm. When I asked his name, he thought for a moment and said one word. Cornelius. I wrote it down like I always do. Temporary name, placeholder. But when I asked him where he was, he looked straight at me and said the name of the hospital, the floor, and my full name. First and last. I assumed I'd introduced myself. I hadn't. That was the moment I should have stepped out of the room, called a supervisor, done anything but stay. But in my line of work, you're trained to believe there's always a rational explanation. You tell yourself memory is fragile, that stress rewires people, that the brain fills in gaps when it has to. I didn't understand yet that Cornelius wasn't missing his memories. He was replacing them. By the time you've been in emergency medicine as long as I have, nights start to blur together. Different faces, same questions, same answers written into charts that no one ever reads twice. I've worked the overnight shift for years, not because I like it, but because it's predictable. The kinds of patients who come in after midnight follow patterns. Alcohol, accidents, anxiety attacks that feel like heart attacks until the vitals say otherwise. You learn to read people quickly. Who's scared? Who's exaggerating? Who just needs someone calm in front of them? That night was quiet. Too quiet to stand out in my memory at first. No trauma alerts. No ambulances stacked in the bay. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of monitors breathing for people who couldn't. I was halfway through charting when triage called down. Female nurse requested, the clerk said. Found wandering, possible confusion. That alone wasn't unusual. People come in disoriented all the time. Low blood sugar, dehydration, sleep deprivation. I grabbed my tablet, took a sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier, and headed for the intake room. I expected another long night. I didn't know yet that this was the last patient who would ever feel routine to me. He was sitting on the edge of the bed when I walked in, hands folded neatly in his lap, back straight, eyes tracking the door as it closed behind me. Most patients avoid eye contact at first. They look at the floor, the walls, anywhere but at the person asking questions. He didn't. He watched me the way people do when they're trying to understand something new, not threatening. Curious, patient. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Clean clothes, no visible injuries, no hospital bracelet scars. He didn't smell like alcohol or sweat or panic. If he'd been sitting in a waiting room, no one would have noticed him. "Hi," I said, pulling on gloves out of habit. "My name is—" "I know," he said gently. I paused, waiting for him to finish the sentence. He didn't. Patients interrupt themselves all the time. Nerves, confusion, shock. I smiled the way I always do and went on with the intake questions. "Do you know why you're here?" He shook his head once. Slow, deliberate. "No," he said. "But I'm not hurt." His voice was steady, not rehearsed, not slurred. "Do you remember your name?" He looked down at his hands like he was checking something that should have been there. Then he nodded. "Cornelius?" Not a common choice for someone guessing. Too specific. Too old-fashioned. I typed it into the chart, marking it as provisional. "Do you know today's date?" "No." "Do you know where you are?" "Yes." That made me glance up. "Where?" He met my eyes again. "Emergency. 2nd floor. North wing." He said it casually, like someone reciting directions they'd taken 1,000 times. I told myself it was a coincidence, a lucky guess, a man who'd overheard someone talking. That's what training does. It gives you explanations before fear ever gets a chance. Still, when I left the room to grab his vitals, I felt something unfamiliar. Not alarm, not danger. Just the quiet sense that I'd skipped a step without realizing it. His vitals were perfect. Blood pressure normal, heart rate steady, oxygen saturation where it should be. No tremors, no delayed responses, no signs of intoxication or withdrawal. I ran through the standard neurological checks while making casual conversation, watching for hesitation, confusion, anything out of sync. He followed every instruction without needing it repeated. "Close your eyes. Touch your nose. Follow my finger." Each movement was precise, not stiff, not exaggerated, like someone who understood the point of the exercise. "Any history of seizures?" I asked. "No." "Head injury?" "No." "Medications?" He paused for the first time, not in confusion, more like consideration. "I don't think so," he said carefully. That answer bothered me more than a flat no. People with memory loss usually know they don't know. They're aware of the gap. He spoke like someone checking an inventory. I made a note and continued. "When's the last thing you remember?" He looked past me, eyes unfocusing slightly. "Waking up," he said, already knowing I was late. "Late for what?" He frowned. "Just a little. That part's gone." That made sense. Stress does that. The brain prioritizes urgency over detail. I nodded, reassuring, and finished the intake. As I stepped back toward the door, he spoke again. "You drink your coffee black," he said. I stopped. I hadn't brought coffee into the room. I hadn't mentioned it. I turned back to him. "Excuse me?" He looked genuinely surprised by my reaction. "Sorry," he said quickly. You thought what?" He shook his head, a small apologetic smile forming. "Nothing important." I told myself it was a guess, a lucky one. Most people do. Still, as I walked down the hall to file the chart, I checked the cup in my hand. Black. No sugar. And for the first time that night, I hesitated before typing his name into the system. I logged into the system to create his chart. Name, approximate age. Found wandering, altered mental status. Standard. The hospital database is old, but thorough. Every admission, every transfer, every discharge leaves a footprint. I typed in Cornelius without expecting anything to come up. Just habit. The screen paused longer than usual, then returned results. Not one. 3. Same name. Same approximate age range. Same physical description. Admitted over the last 8 years. different dates, different attending physicians, same hospital. My first thought was coincidence. Hospitals see thousands of patients. Names repeat. But as I opened the first file, my stomach tightened. Chief complaint. Confusion. No ID. Vitals. Normal. Neurological exam. Unremarkable. Disposition. Left against medical advice. I opened the second. Same notes. Different handwriting. Different nurse signature. Third file. Same again. What caught my attention wasn't the repetition. It was the gaps. No scans uploaded, no lab work attached, no discharge summaries. Just intake notes, like the patient stopped existing the moment he left the room. I checked the photos attached to the files. Each one showed a man who looked close. Not identical, but close enough that my brain tried to smooth the differences away. Hair slightly different, weight fluctuating. Same eyes. I leaned back in my chair and told myself what I always tell new staff. Systems glitch, merged profiles, bad data entry. It happens more often than people think. Still, I flagged the chart and called IT. While the phone rang, I glanced back at the screen. One of the files had updated. A timestamp changed. From 8 years ago to 3 minutes ago. And the attending nurse listed on the update was me. I went back to his room with the tablet tucked against my chest like it could ground me. It hadn't picked up yet. The system still showed my name where it didn't belong. Cornelius was sitting exactly where I'd left him. Same posture. Same calm. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time he smiled. Not wide, not unsettling. Relieved. "You found it," he said. I stopped just inside the doorway. "Found what?" "The record," he replied. "The older ones." My mouth went dry. I kept my voice even. Professional. "You've been here before?" He considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said. "Several times." "How would you know that?" He gestured vaguely toward his head. "It's easier to remember places than people." "That's not how memory loss works," I said before I could stop myself. He nodded. "I know." I moved closer, checking his wristband, his chart, anything that could anchor this conversation back to procedure. "You understand that you can't access our records," I said. "Patients don't see that information." "I didn't see it," he replied. "I felt it change. That word landed wrong. I ignored it." "Do you remember the last time you were here?" He shook his head. "No. I remember leaving." "Leaving how?" He looked at me then. Really looked. "Through someone else," he said. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. I glanced down at my tablet. The timestamp was still there. My name still attached. "Cornelius," I said slowly. "Do you know me?" His brow furrowed, not in confusion but in concern. "Not the way you mean," he said. "But I know you drink your coffee black because you don't like how sugar coats your tongue." I felt a chill run up my arms. I'd never told him that. I'd never told anyone that. "That's not relevant," I said, sharper than I meant to. He flinched. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I'm still adjusting." "Adjusting to what?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he said, "Being alone." The monitor behind him beeped softly, steady and normal. Nothing in the room looked wrong. But as I left, I realized something I hadn't noticed before. He hadn't once asked me a question. Not my name. Not where he was. Not what would happen next. He was waiting. I pulled his chart up again at the nurse's station. Same entries, same timestamps, same versions of him stretching back through years I hadn't worked here yet. I checked staffing logs. I wasn't on duty on any of those nights. In fact, during one of them, I'd been living in another state. That should have been enough to shut the whole thing down in my head. Corrupted records, duplicate profiles, a technical mess that looked worse than it was. I walked over to the charge nurse and asked her, casually, if she remembered a patient named Cornelius. She shook her head without hesitation. Doesn't ring a bell. What about older admissions? I pressed. 8, 9 years back. She shrugged. You know how it is. If they don't code or come back, they blur together. Fair. I asked a resident next, then another nurse. No one remembered him. I went back to his room a third time, this time with a social worker in tow. Cornelius greeted us both with the same polite nod. The social worker introduced herself. He listened attentively. When she asked him if he had any family, any contacts, any place he could stay, he answered honestly. No, he said, not anymore. And before that, she asked. He hesitated. I don't think I was supposed to keep them. The social worker glanced at me. I forced a smile and redirected the conversation. After she left, I stood by the door longer than necessary. Cornelius, I said quietly, do you understand that we're trying to help you? He nodded. I know, he said. You always do. That word again. Always. I felt irritation creep in, a defense mechanism I recognized in myself. You don't know me, I said. You don't know anyone here. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. That's what's different this time, he said. Different how? You noticed? I left the room without responding. Back at the station, I finally noticed something I should have seen earlier. In every previous chart, under disposition, the same note appeared, written in different hands. Same wording. Patient left, accompanied. No explanation of who accompanied him. No signatures. Just that phrase. And below it, added in smaller text, almost like an afterthought. Memory transfer. Successful. The lab results came back just before dawn. Routine panels at first glance. Electrolytes. CBC. Nothing alarming. I almost closed the file. Then I noticed the flag. Blood type mismatch. The sample drawn in triage didn't match the one taken an hour later. Not a clerical error. 2 separate phlebotomists. 2 separate timestamps. Type A negative. Then AB positive. That doesn't happen. People don't change blood types. I walked down to the lab myself, tablet still open in my hand. The tech on duty pulled up the samples, confused, but not panicked. We reran it twice, she said. Different vials. Same result. Could they be mislabeled? I asked. She shook her head. Barcodes match. Wristband scan confirms patient ID. I didn't correct her. The patient ID didn't exist before tonight. I went back to Cornelius's room slowly, my footsteps sounding too loud in the hallway. He was awake. Of course he was. You took blood, he said. Yes, I replied. And the results don't make sense. He nodded, like I'd confirmed something he'd already expected. It depends on how long I stay, he said. How long you stay where? With one person. I felt my throat tighten. That's not how biology works, I said. He smiled faintly. That's not biology, he replied. It's continuity. I checked his IV site. Clean. No infiltration. No bleeding. When was the last time you were here? I asked. He looked at the ceiling, eyes tracking something I couldn't see. 8 years ago, he said. You were younger. I stared at him. I didn't work here 8 years ago. I know, he said gently. You worked somewhere else. I took a step back. That information isn't public. No, he agreed. It's not. He turned his head toward me. For what it's worth, he added, this one feels stable. My skin prickled. This one? I asked. He didn't answer. But as I left the room, my tablet vibrated. A new lab result had been uploaded. Blood type, O negative. Universal donor. I didn't go back to Cornelius's room right away. I went to security. The hospital's security office was a cramped space in the basement, all humming monitors and stale coffee. Night shift meant one officer, half asleep, scrolling through feeds. I need footage from trauma too, I said. From tonight, since intake. He frowned but pulled it up. The timestamp showed exactly what I expected. Cornelius being wheeled in. Cornelius sitting upright on the bed. Cornelius answering questions. Normal. Too normal. Rewind, I said. He scrubbed backward. That's when it happened. Cornelius was already there, not being brought in, not wheeled through the doors, just sitting on the trauma bed, hands folded, back straight, looking at the door, waiting. The officer leaned forward. That's weird, he muttered. How long was he there? I asked. He checked the timestamps again. Looks like 46 minutes. Before triage. Before anyone, he said. I felt cold. Show me earlier. He rewound further. The room was empty. Then it wasn't. There was no transition. One frame. Empty bed. Next frame. Cornelius, already seated. No flicker. No glitch. No distortion. Just presence. The officer sat back slowly. That's not possible, he said. No, I agreed. It's not. He glanced at me. You want me to flag this? Yes, I said. And export a copy. He hesitated. Ma'am, once I do that, administration gets notified. I know. He clicked anyway. As the system processed the request, Cornelius turned his head on screen. He looked directly at the camera. Not accidentally. Not passing. Direct eye contact. And then, he smiled. The officer swore under his breath. That wasn't there before, he said. What? I asked. He rewound a few seconds. The smile was gone. Neutral expression. Hands folded. Did you see it? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. I did. The system finished exporting. At the bottom of the screen, a small notification appeared. File exists. Previous instance found the officer froze. Previous instance? He said. I swallowed. How old? He clicked the file history. The date made my knees weak. 8 years ago. Same room. Same patient. Same posture. The officer looked at me. Do you know this guy? I shook my head, but my hands were shaking, because deep down, I already knew the truth. Cornelius hadn't arrived tonight. He had returned. I didn't leave the security office right away. I stood there staring at the screen while the officer pretended not to watch me fall apart. "Can you open it?" I asked. "The older file." He hesitated, then nodded. The footage loaded slowly. Different camera angle, older interface, lower resolution. But the room was unmistakable. Trauma 2. Same bed. Same wall-mounted monitor. Same scuff mark near the door where stretchers always clipped the frame. And there he was. Cornelius. 8 years younger, maybe. Or not younger at all. Same posture, same folded hands, same stillness. Waiting. A nurse entered the room. My breath caught. It was me. Not younger me. Not a blurry figure that resembled me. Me. Same height. Same walk. Same habit of tucking loose hair behind my ear before speaking. I watched myself sit on the stool. Watched myself smile. Watched myself say something the footage couldn't capture. The Cornelius on screen looked at me with the same storm-colored eyes. The same look I'd seen tonight. Recognition. I felt nauseous. "I was on vacation 8 years ago," I whispered. The officer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The timestamp confirmed it. I wasn't scheduled. I wasn't clocked in. I wasn't supposed to exist in this building that night. Yet there I was. Working. Charting. Nodding. At one point in the footage, I leaned closer to Cornelius. He said something. My body language changed. Not fear. Understanding. Then something even worse happened. I stood up, walked to the door, paused, turned back, and looked directly into the camera. Not like someone glancing around a room, like someone checking if they were being watched. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I don't think you should be seeing this." I couldn't stop. I watched until the end. Until security escorted Cornelius out. Until the room emptied. Until the other me remained behind. Alone. I stood in the empty room for nearly a full minute on the footage. Then I sat on the bed, in Cornelius's place, hands folded, waiting. The screen went black. I staggered back. "That's not possible," I said. The officer didn't argue. "I've worked here 22 years, he said quietly. "I've seen glitches, bad data, corrupt files." He looked at the frozen frame of me sitting on the bed. This isn't that. I realized something then. The system hadn't mistaken me for someone else. It hadn't misfiled the footage. It knew exactly who I was. And worse, it knew who I would become. Because the older file wasn't labeled Cornelius. It was labeled with my employee ID. I didn't go home. I went back to his room. Cornelius was sitting exactly where I'd left him, hands folded, back straight, waiting. "You saw it," he said before I spoke. My voice came out unsteady. "There's footage of me, from 8 years ago." "Yes, I wasn't here," I said. "I was in Hawaii." "You were," he agreed. "And I was also here." I stared at him. "That's impossible." He tilted his head slightly. "That depends on how you define you." I pulled the privacy curtain closed behind me, lowered my voice. "Explain." Cornelius exhaled slowly, like someone choosing words carefully. "People think identity is memory," he said, "but it's not. It's continuity." I didn't interrupt. "When the system needs stability," he continued, "it finds someone who can hold it." "Hold what?" "The gap." He gestured vaguely at his head, at the room, at me. Cornelius isn't a person, he said calmly. It's a role. My stomach dropped. A placeholder identity, he went on. Used when something has to be removed, without collapsing everything around it. Removed? He met my eyes. A person? I felt cold. You're saying someone was erased? Yes. And replaced with you? No, he corrected gently. Replaced with me first. Silence pressed in around us. I was here before, he said. Before you were ready. What happened to the original? I asked. His jaw tightened for just a second. They didn't survive the transition. I swallowed hard. And you think I will? He studied me carefully. I think you already did. I shook my head. No. I remember my childhood, my training, my sister, You remember what you were given, he interrupted softly. I felt something crack inside me. Why me? I whispered. Cornelius leaned forward. Because you don't panic when reality fractures, he said. You adapt. That's not a compliment. It's a qualification. I backed away. You killed Marcus Wellington. His expression changed. Not anger. Sadness. No, he said. I stopped him. And erased yourself instead? He smiled faintly. Someone had to. I stared at him. And now what? Cornelius stood. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired. Now I leave, he said, and the system promotes the next stable node. My heart pounded. You mean? He stepped closer. You're already in the files, Prudence, he said quietly. You always have been. What happens to me? He paused at the door. That depends, he said, on whether you keep pretending you're just a nurse. He opened the door, then stopped. One more thing, he added. Yes? He looked back with those storm-colored eyes. When they start coming in, he said, confused, empty, bleeding from things they don't remember doing. He smiled sadly. Don't try to save them. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in my career, I didn't chart the encounter, because I already knew someone else had. Cornelius didn't show up on the discharge board. No timestamp, no destination, no transport record. Just gone. Security said they escorted him out. Social services said they never received him. The transport team insisted they picked someone up, but couldn't agree on what he looked like. By morning, the chart was incomplete. Missing fields, broken links, notes saved under my login. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Every entry was written in my shorthand, my phrasing, my abbreviations. I didn't remember writing any of it. I finished my shift on autopilot, smiled when appropriate, answered questions I'd answered 1,000 times before. But something had shifted. Not fear. Alignment. That afternoon, I went home and checked my old journals. I keep them boxed in the closet training notes, early ER reflections, the kind of things you write when you still believe memory is permanent. One notebook was out of order. Wrong year. Wrong ink. Inside there was a single entry. No date. Just a sentence, written in my handwriting. If you're reading this, it worked. Don't look for him. I sat on the floor until the sun went down. That week, the patients started coming in. One woman who knew her name but not her face. A man who could recite trauma protocols he'd never learned. A teenager who insisted he'd already died once. They all had the same look. Not fear. Recognition. They watched me closely, like they were checking something. I stopped asking certain questions, stopped pushing for memory retrieval, started focusing on stabilization, containment, continuity. At night, I stand in front of the mirror sometimes. Not too long. Just long enough to confirm that my reflection keeps up with me. And when new patients arrive, confused, hollowed out, desperate to understand what they've lost, I hear Cornelius's voice in my head. Don't try to save them. So I don't. I help them survive the transition, because now I understand. Emergency rooms aren't places where people are saved. They're places where identities are triaged, and someone always has to stay behind to hold the role. There's a moment, right before the night shift ends, when the ER goes quiet. Not empty, just paused. Monitors still hum, lights still flicker. But for a few minutes, no one is actively becoming someone else. That's when I feel it most. Not fear. Responsibility. A few weeks after Cornelius disappeared, a new chart appeared in the system. No admission time, no triage notes. Just a name. Mine. I deleted it. It reappeared the next day. I stopped trying after that. Some things want to be recorded. I still work nights, still wear the same badge, still answer to the same name. No one notices anything wrong. That's how I know it's holding. Sometimes patients ask me questions that don't make sense. Do you remember before? Did it hurt when you forgot? Am I going to disappear? I tell them what keeps them stable. What keeps everything stable. You're safe, I say. Just rest. And most of the time, that's true. I don't look for Cornelius anymore. But occasionally, when a patient stares at me a little too long, when their eyes track my movements with quiet familiarity, I wonder if they recognize the role, or if they recognize me. I don't stay in front of mirrors, not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I'm afraid I won't feel anything at all. And because I know this now. If identity can be rewritten cleanly enough, the most dangerous part isn't forgetting who you were. It's never realizing you changed. My name is Prudence. At least, that's the name that works. And if you ever wake up somewhere familiar and still feel like something is missing, don't panic. It means the transition succeeded. Someone remembered to stay. And this time, it was me. Story 2. By the time you've worked in an emergency room for as long as I have, you stop reacting to labels. Psychiatric patient, self-harm case, brought in by paramedics. Those words don't mean danger. They mean routine. We see people like that every week, sometimes every night. Most of them are exhausted. Some are scared. Some are angry at the world or at themselves. Our job is simple. Stabilize, assess, contain, hand off to psych. That night, the call came in just after 11. Male, early 30s. Multiple self-inflicted lacerations. Nothing in the report suggested urgency beyond the usual. No violence toward others. No substances reported. Conscious. Breathing on his own. I remember thinking, Good. That meant time. Time to clean wounds properly. Time to talk. When the stretcher rolled in, I was already in that mindset. This was just another psychiatric patient. And nothing about the case, not yet, gave me any reason to think otherwise. The first thing that felt wrong wasn't the blood. I've seen worse injuries than his. Deeper cuts. Messier damage. What stood out was the way he looked at us. Calm. Present. Almost considerate. As we transferred him from the stretcher to the bed, he met my eyes and gave a small nod. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I'm sorry to cause extra work." That made me pause. Most patients in acute self-harm cases are dissociated, withdrawn, or overwhelmed by shame. They avoid eye contact, or they lash out. Ezekiel did neither. He watched everything with polite interest, as if he were a guest who'd arrived late and didn't want to be rude. "I'm Charity," I said automatically, pulling on gloves. "I'm going to take care of you tonight." "I appreciate that," he replied. "You're very steady. That helps." It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't manipulative. It was observational. I began my assessment. Heart rate slightly elevated. Blood pressure stable. No signs of intoxication. When I started cutting away the soaked bandages, he looked down at his arms. Not with distress, but with something closer to evaluation. "Did you do this tonight?" I asked. "Yes," he said easily. "And no, I'm not trying to die." He glanced up, as if anticipating the next question. "I know how that sounds," he added. "But this isn't suicidal behavior. It's maintenance." I noted the phrasing without reacting. "Maintenance of what?" I asked. He considered the question carefully. "Containment," he said. "But I imagine that will make more sense later." I didn't push. At that stage, it still fit. Patients often explain their behavior in metaphors. It's a way of making unbearable things feel structured. Still, as I cleaned the blood from his skin, I became aware of something else. He never once apologized for hurting himself. Only for inconveniencing us. And that was when I first felt it. Not fear. Just a quiet, professional discomfort. The kind you feel when someone follows a script you don't recognize. When I finished removing the bandages, I had to stop myself from staring. Not because of the severity, because of the precision. The cuts on his arms weren't chaotic. They weren't desperate or impulsive. They were deliberate. Each one ran parallel to the next, evenly spaced, consistent in angle. Some were shallow, some were deeper, but all of them followed the same pattern, as if someone had measured before making the first incision. I'd treated self-inflicted wounds for years. This wasn't how people hurt themselves when they're overwhelmed. This was how someone worked through a plan. "You did all of these yourself?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes," Ezekiel said. "I'm very careful." I gently palpated the surrounding tissue. No hesitation marks, no random variation, no trembling lines. "You're not in pain?" I asked. He shook his head. "Pain would interfere with accuracy." I felt a flicker of unease, but it still wasn't fear. More like professional dissonance. Self-harm is usually about release, about loss of control. This looked like control taken too far. "These will need sutures," I said. "A few of them at least." "I expected that," he replied. just not too tightly. I looked up. Why? He hesitated, then answered honestly. Because closing them completely too soon causes problems. What kind of problems? He met my eyes. Pressure, he said. Internal. I documented the wounds carefully. Location. Depth. Pattern. I told myself I was overanalyzing. That precision doesn't automatically mean something else is wrong. Still, as the attending physician came in and I stepped aside, one thought stayed with me. If this was self-harm, it was the most controlled version I had ever seen. And for the first time since he arrived, I felt the edge of the case starting to shift. While the doctor prepared the sutures, I stayed with Ezekiel. This was usually the point where things shifted. Patients who harm themselves often start to shut down once treatment begins. They get quiet. Or defensive. Ezekiel didn't. He watched the process closely, his attention sharp but calm. "You're not suicidal," the attending physician said, more as a statement than a question. "No," Ezekiel replied immediately. "That would defeat the purpose." I glanced at him. "Then what is the purpose?" I asked. "To stay alive," he said. "As I am." The doctor paused, needle hovering. "Explain." Ezekiel took a slow breath. "When people hurt themselves because they want to disappear, they cut too deep," he said. "When they want attention, the cuts are shallow and erratic." He nodded toward his arms. "These are neither." "They're measured," I said before I could stop myself. "Yes," he agreed, "because dying would be a failure." The word hung in the air. Failure. Not tragedy. Not escape. Failure. The doctor exchanged a brief look with me, then continued stitching. "So you hurt yourself to prevent something worse?" she asked. Ezekiel nodded. "If I don't," he said, "the pressure builds." "What pressure?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, as if checking something internally. "The kind that doesn't show up on scans," he said quietly. "The kind that looks for weak points." I wrote it down exactly as he said it. Patients use metaphor all the time. This still fit. But something about his certainty bothered me. Most people in crisis are trying to convince themselves. Ezekiel spoke like someone explaining a process he'd tested repeatedly. "Has this happened before?" the doctor asked. "Yes," he said. "Many times." "And every time you survived?" "Yes." "Because you planned it?" I asked. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me. "No," he said. "Because I maintained it." I felt that same quiet discomfort return. This wasn't despair. This was management. And I realized then, Ezekiel wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing containment. We moved him to a monitored room while we waited for psych. Standard protocol. I expected him to go quiet once he was alone. He didn't. When I came back to check his vitals, he was sitting upright, hands resting on his thighs, eyes closed, not sleeping. Listening. "Do you want to tell me what you think is happening?" I asked. Most patients hesitate at that question. They test whether they'll be judged. Ezekiel opened his eyes immediately. "I don't think," he said. "I observe." I waited. "There's something inside me," he continued. "Not a voice, not a thought." "Then what?" I asked. "A system," he said. One that responds to accumulation. Accumulation of what? He searched for the right word. Stress, trauma, time, suppression. He paused. Blood pressure too, but not the kind you measure. I kept my expression neutral. The system doesn't like being ignored, he went on. When it's contained properly, it stays quiet. And when it's not, it looks for an exit. I shifted my weight. That's when you hurt yourself? That's when I release, he corrected gently. I'd heard many theories over the years. Parasites, demons, punishment narratives. This was different. There was no moral framing, no fear, just mechanics. How did you figure this out? I asked. Trial and error, he said. I used to cut randomly. And? That caused spillover. The word made my stomach tighten. Spillover onto whom? I asked. He looked at me carefully. Other people, he said. People who were too close when the pressure peaked. I told myself this was classic delusional projection. Still, I felt the room change. Not temperature, not lighting, attention. I don't enjoy this, Ezekiel added, but it's predictable. He gestured to his arms. These patterns reduce secondary impact. I finished my notes slowly. What happens if you don't do it at all? I asked. For the first time since he arrived, he hesitated. That, he said quietly, is what you should be afraid of. It was close to 2 in the morning when I noticed the change. Nothing dramatic, no alarms, no sudden movement. Just a subtle shift in the way Ezekiel was holding himself. His shoulders were tighter, his jaw set, his breathing slower, more deliberate, controlled. I checked his vitals again. Still normal. Are you uncomfortable? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once. Yes, he said. It's starting. I glanced at the monitor. Heart rate steady. Blood pressure within range. What's starting? I asked. The buildup, he said. It always feels like this at first. He pressed his fingers lightly against his forearm, not touching the wounds, just above them. Like something pushing outward, he continued, testing weak spots. I followed his gaze. The skin around the sutures looked normal. No swelling, no redness. I told you we closed them too soon, he added quietly. The release wasn't complete. I felt irritation rise, professional, controlled. You needed those closed, I said. You were bleeding. Yes, he agreed. But now the pressure has nowhere to go. He shifted slightly in the bed. The movement was careful, economical. I don't need more medication, he said, before I could suggest it. That would make it worse. Why? I asked. Because suppression increases internal load, he replied. Sedation delays release. It doesn't reduce accumulation. I noted the phrasing again. Load. Accumulation. Release. He spoke like someone describing fluid dynamics. I checked the room. Door closed. Security outside. Everything was contained. Still, the air felt heavier. Does this always happen? I asked. Yes, he said. When intervention interrupts the cycle. And what happens next? He looked at me then. Really looked. If nothing changes, he said carefully, the system compensates. How? His eyes flicked briefly toward the door. By redistributing, he said. A chill moved through me. Redistributing what? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, as if bracing himself. I'm running out of margin, he said, and you're very close. I stepped back without realizing I was doing it. That was the moment. Not when he talked about systems or pressure, but when I realized he was tracking distance, not emotionally, spatially. I was adjusting the IV when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow where there shouldn't have been one, a ripple from my own movement. Then it happened again. Subtle. Localized. Just beneath the skin of his forearm. I froze. The sutured wounds were intact. No bleeding, no swelling. But the skin around them shifted. Not a twitch. Not a muscle spasm. It moved the way liquid moves when something presses against it from below. Did you feel that? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Yes, Ezekiel said. That's what I was trying to tell you. I leaned closer despite myself. The movement traveled slowly, deliberately, stopping just short of the stitches, like something testing a barrier it didn't recognize. That's not possible, I said. He gave a small, tired smile. It's not supposed to be, he replied. That's why most people never see it. I pressed the call button. The attending physician came in within seconds. We watched together as the skin shifted again. She frowned. Fasciculation, she said automatically. Involuntary muscle contractions. But she didn't sound convinced. The pattern repeated. Same path. Same pause at the sutures. Ezekiel's breathing deepened. It's looking for an outlet, he said. You closed the wrong ones. What are you talking about? The doctor asked. He didn't answer her. He looked at me instead. I need to manage this, he said quietly, before it compensates. We're not letting you hurt yourself, she said firmly. Ezekiel nodded. I understand, he said. Then you need to move me. Move you where? Somewhere with fewer people, he said. Less contact. The word contact landed wrong. The movement under his skin intensified, not faster, stronger. And for the first time since he arrived, I saw fear on his face. It happened without tearing. That was the part I couldn't rationalize. The sutures didn't snap. The skin didn't rip. They simply separated. One by one, the closed wounds began to part along the same precise lines they'd followed before. Clean, measured, almost gentle. Blood surfaced slowly, dark and viscous, pooling instead of spraying. The attending physician swore under her breath. That's not how tissue behaves, she said. Ezekiel's hands trembled. I told you, he whispered. It won't stay contained. I moved to apply pressure. The moment my gloved fingers touched his arm, the movement beneath the skin surged. Not toward my hand. Away from it. Redirecting. Stop, Ezekiel said sharply. Don't compress it. I'm controlling the bleeding, I said. You're changing the flow, he replied. And it's already looking for another route. Another wound opened on his opposite arm. Then another, higher this time. The room felt suddenly smaller. Call psych, the doctor said. And security. I hit the button. Ezekiel's breathing turned shallow. It's compensating, he said. I don't have enough margin left. What happens when you run out? I asked. He looked at me, eyes wide. It finds someone else, he said. Someone close. As if on cue, the door opened. Security stepped in. The air shifted. Ezekiel cried out, "No too many." And then, "Hey," the guard said calmly. "You okay in here?" I watched Ezekiel's eyes track him. Not emotionally, structurally, like a system registering a new variable. "That's enough," the doctor said. "We're sedating him." Ezekiel shook his head violently. "Sedation traps it," he said. "It doesn't stop it." The needle went in anyway. Within seconds, his body slackened. The movement under his skin slowed, then stopped. The wound stilled. For a moment, the room breathed again. We thought it was over. None of us noticed the guard step back, or the way he pressed his hand against his forearm, as if something had just begun pushing outward from the inside. It was the guard who spoke first, not loudly, not panicked, just confused. "Nurse," he said, "I think I cut myself." I turned. He was standing near the door, one hand wrapped around his forearm. Blood seeped slowly between his fingers. "I didn't feel it," he added. "That's the weird part." I crossed the room in 3 steps. When he moved his hand, my stomach dropped. The cut wasn't random. It was parallel, clean, in the exact same orientation as Ezekiel's wounds. Same spacing, same angle. I felt my pulse spike. "That's not possible," I said, already reaching for gauze. The guard stared at his arm. "I was just standing there," he said. I felt this pressure, like my skin was too tight. Then this. Behind us, Ezekiel lay sedated, motionless. The wounds on his arms had stopped bleeding, too cleanly. The attending physician followed my gaze. "No," she said quietly. "No, no, no." Another line appeared on the guard's skin, not tearing, forming. Slowly, deliberately. "Get him out of here," she snapped. "Now!" As we moved the guard toward the door, Ezekiel stirred. His eyes fluttered open, just for a second. He looked at the guard, then at me. "I warned you," he murmured thickly. "When containment fails, it reroutes." His eyes closed again. The guard groaned as the pressure seemed to increase. I caught myself thinking something I shouldn't have. This isn't spreading, it's balancing. That was when I understood. This was no longer a self-harm case. It was a containment failure. And we had just become part of the system. The first guard wasn't the last. Within 20 minutes, the ER changed. Not loudly, not all at once. It shifted the way pressure shifts in a sealed room. A nurse complained of dizziness and sat down, just for a second. When she stood back up, blood was running down her wrist. A paramedic started swearing under his breath, clawing at his sleeve. When he rolled it up, 3 thin red lines were already there. Parallel, precise, identical. "What's happening to us?" someone asked. No one answered. I watched it spread with clinical horror. Not like an infection. No coughing, no fever, no contact pattern. Only proximity. Anyone who stayed near Ezekiel long enough felt it first as pressure. A fullness. A sensation like something pressing outward from the inside. Then the skin opened. Always the same way. The attending physician ordered the trauma bay cleared. Isolation protocols escalated. Security sealed the wing. But it didn't stop. Because it wasn't airborne. It wasn't viral. It was redistributing. Ezekiel stirred again, eyes half open. "They're not sick," he whispered. "They're helping me carry it." I felt my throat go dry. "Carry what?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Me." Another nurse cried out as blood soaked through her sleeve. "Enough," the physician said, voice shaking. "We sedate deeper. Maximum." The syringe went in. Ezekiel's body relaxed, and the bleeding stopped. Not slowly, instantly. The wounds on the staff closed, like they had never existed. Scars remained. Faint. Exact. No one spoke. We all understood the same thing at the same time. When Ezekiel was unconscious, the pressure had nowhere to go. And when he was awake, he was a valve. The decision wasn't written anywhere. There was no protocol for this, no checkbox in the system, no training module. It happened the way most terrible decisions happen in emergency medicine. Quietly, between glances, between breaths. The CDC physician cleared his throat. "If this patient believes the bloodletting stabilizes his condition," he said carefully, "and if preventing it demonstrably causes harm to others." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We all looked at the scars on our arms. 7 people. Same pattern, same depth, same spacing. I realized my hands were shaking. "Are you suggesting," the attending asked slowly, "that we allow him to continue harming himself?" Ezekiel opened his eyes. "I don't harm myself," he said gently. "I contain it." The room was silent. Finally, the CDC physician nodded once. "Under supervision," he said. "Sterile environment. Controlled depth, limited volume." I felt sick, but I also felt relief. Ezekiel was given a surgical tray, a single sterile scalpel. He washed his hands like a surgeon preparing for the OR. When he made the first cut, it wasn't frantic. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. The blood flowed slowly, dark and thick, catching the light with a faint sheen that didn't look natural. As it did, something shifted. The air pressure eased. The tension in my chest loosened. One by one, monitors around the ER normalized. A nurse gasped. Her scars were fading, not healing, withdrawing, like something pulling itself back home. Ezekiel exhaled, long and controlled. "That's better," he said quietly. Balance restored. No one spoke. No one moved. Because in that moment, we all understood the truth we were pretending not to see. This wasn't treatment. This was maintenance. And we were no longer caregivers. We were accomplices. The change was immediate, almost surgical. Within minutes of Ezekiel's controlled bloodletting, the ER began to return to itself. The alarms stopped cycling. Monitors stabilized. Patients who had been complaining of dizziness, nosebleeds, pressure behind the eyes, all of it faded. Bartholomew sat on the edge of a gurney, staring at his arms. The cuts were gone. Not scars, not healed wounds. Gone. Like they had never existed at all. One of the residents whispered, "That's not how tissue regeneration works." No one corrected him, because we all knew that medicine had already lost jurisdiction over what was happening. Ezekiel was calm now, clear-eyed, grounded in a way I hadn't seen since he arrived. "It doesn't like chaos," he explained, as if discussing weather. "It prefers order, structure, predictability." The CDC team documented everything: blood samples, air samples, surface swabs. Later, those records would be sealed. But that night, I watched one of the technicians stare at a vial of Ezekiel's blood for a long time before quietly labeling it unstable. Do not freeze. By dawn, the pressure was gone. The invisible heaviness lifted. Staff members stopped reporting symptoms. Even the sense of being watched, that constant peripheral awareness, faded like a bad dream. Ezekiel slept. For the first time since he'd arrived, his sleep looked natural. No movement under the skin, no tremors, no new wounds forming. Dr. Reeves stood beside me, arms crossed tightly. "We can't keep doing this," she said under her breath. "This isn't care. It's ritual." I didn't answer. Because rituals work. That was the problem. By mid-morning, the CDC issued their conclusion. No active threat. No communicable agent. No justification for continued containment. Ezekiel was no longer a danger. At least, not while he was allowed to manage it. He was discharged that afternoon, escorted quietly into a vehicle that didn't have hospital markings. Before he left, he asked to speak to me alone. "They'll say this is over," he told me. "And for now, it is." He paused. "But it never ends. It just waits." I watched the car pull away. The ER looked normal again. Too normal. The kind of normal that only exists after something has passed through and chosen not to stay. Ezekiel didn't leave like a dangerous patient. There were no restraints, no sedatives, no police escort. He walked out of the emergency department on his own feet, wearing a clean set of hospital-issued clothes, his posture straight, his expression almost peaceful, as if he'd just completed a long, exhausting task. Before he stepped through the sliding doors, he turned back. His eyes found mine immediately. "You did the right thing," he said. Not thank you. Not I'm sorry. Just that. Then he was gone. The hospital administration acted quickly. Too quickly. By the end of the day, internal emails went out. Incident classified as psychosomatic cluster response. No further discussion required. Do not document unofficial observations. Refer all questions to administration. The CDC team vanished before sunset. Their equipment gone. Their names missing from the sign-in log. When I checked the system the next morning, Ezekiel's chart was already being corrected. Language softened, details removed, patterns dismissed. By the end of the week, it read like any other self-harm case, except for one thing: the scars. Some of us kept them. Faint lines on our arms that never fully faded. They didn't hurt. But sometimes, when the ER got busy, when the pressure built, they would ache. Not pain, more like anticipation. I asked Dr. Reeves if she felt it too. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I handed in my resignation this morning." She left medicine 3 months later. Bartholomew retired early. 2 nurses transferred to different states. One resident disappeared halfway through his rotation. No forwarding address. Officially, Ezekiel was just another troubled patient. Unofficially, he changed all of us. Because once you accept that bleeding can be containment, you can never see self-harm the same way again. And once you accept that something inside a human body can demand release, you start to wonder what's inside everyone else, including yourself. I tried to convince myself it was over, that what we'd experienced had an end point, a closing bracket. But the body remembers what the mind refuses to hold. Weeks passed. The ER settled back into its familiar rhythm. Trauma codes, overdoses, panic attacks at 3 a.m., all the usual things. And yet, there were moments. A patient complaining of pressure behind the eyes with no visible cause. A nurse rubbing her forearm absently during a particularly busy shift. A resident asking, half joking, if we'd ever considered therapeutic release for stress. No one said Ezekiel's name. We didn't have to. The scars on my arms were almost invisible now. Thin, pale lines that only showed under certain light. But every so often, during high-volume nights, they'd warm. Not burn. Warm. As if blood were being called closer to the surface. I started noticing patterns. Whenever someone in the ER bled heavily, an accident, a trauma case, the pressure in the room eased. Arguments stopped escalating. Machines seemed quieter. People breathed easier. I didn't log it. I didn't say it out loud. But I felt it, like a system recognizing a familiar outlet. One night, a young man came in with deep lacerations on his arms. Self-inflicted. Textbook case. As we cleaned and sutured the wounds, he looked at me and asked, "Does it feel better after?" I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "The pressure," he said. "Like something inside you wants out." I finished the sutures in silence. When he left, stabilized and sedated, I stood in the supply room and stared at my hands. For the first time since Ezekiel, I understood the temptation, not to die, but to release. That realization scared me more than anything that happened that night, because whatever Ezekiel was carrying, it had taught the system how to adapt. And systems don't forget what works. I hadn't thought about Ezekiel in months when I felt it again. Not pain, pressure. The ER was understaffed that night. Too many patients, too many voices. The kind of shift where everything feels one mistake away from collapse. I was in the medication room when the sensation started. A tightness behind my eyes, a fullness in my arms, like blood pressing outward with nowhere to go. I leaned against the counter, breathing slowly. It's just stress, I told myself. Then I noticed the scars. They weren't scars anymore. They were dark, raised, warm beneath my skin. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. No caller ID, just a single message. Balance is harder alone. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A second message followed. You learned how to hold it. Now decide what to do with it. I looked down at my arms. The pressure increased. Not violent, expectant, like something waiting for permission. I locked the medication room door, not because I was afraid of anyone else, but because for the first time, I wasn't sure I trusted myself. And somewhere, deep in my memory, I heard Ezekiel's voice again. Calm. Certain. Containment is a choice. story. It was one of those calls you don't remember later, the kind that blends into every other overnight intake. EMS brought him in just after 3 a.m., wrapped in a thin gray blanket that didn't do much against the cold. Male, late 40s, maybe early 50s. No ID. Picked up behind a grocery store loading dock during a cold snap that had already sent half the city's unhoused population into shelters or ERs. Found him sitting on the ground, the paramedic said. Not unconscious, not combative, just still. The man walked in on his own. No limp, no obvious injury. He smelled like damp clothes and old smoke, but there was something else underneath it. A faint, sour odor I couldn't place. Name? I asked as we guided him onto the gurney. Obadiah, he said calmly. Last name? He shook his head. Just Obadiah. His voice was steady. Too steady for someone who'd been outside all night in sub-freezing temperatures. I checked his hands. No frostbite, no discoloration. Skin was warm, not just not cold. Warm, like he'd been indoors. That's unusual, the resident muttered. Obadiah looked at him and smiled politely. They keep me warm, he said. Who does? I asked. He blinked, as if surprised by the question. The ones that stay close, he replied. We exchanged a glance. Mental health intake, I thought. Another cold weather psych case. I wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. It tightened. And for just a second, I felt something shift beneath his skin. Not movement. Not pressure. Presence. I told myself it was my imagination. I'd been wrong before. The report came in before the labs. Animal control had called it in earlier that night. A cluster. That was the word they used. 3 raccoons behind the same grocery store. A stray cat 2 blocks over. A pigeon found stiff on a bus stop bench. No visible trauma. No blood, just gone. Probably poison, someone had said over the radio. But poison leaves patterns. Foam, convulsions, signs of distress. These animals looked peaceful, as if they'd simply decided to stop. I didn't connect it to Obadiah at first. Why would I? The city was full of dead animals in winter. Then one of the paramedics leaned against the counter beside me. You know that guy we brought in? He said quietly. The homeless one. I nodded. He was sitting right in the middle of them, the medic continued. Didn't touch them. Didn't even look surprised. What do you mean? I asked. He was warm, the medic said. Warmer than me. I glanced through the glass at Obadiah's room. He sat upright on the gurney, blanket folded neatly at his side, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed. Peaceful. Not sleeping. Waiting. When I stepped inside, the air felt thick, not humid, dense, like a room that had been closed too long. Do you know anything about the animals outside? I asked. Obadiah opened his eyes slowly. Yes, he said. No hesitation. They followed me, he added. Then they stayed. That's not how animals behave, I said. He smiled gently. They were tired, he replied. So they rested. A chill crept up my spine. You didn't touch them? I pressed. No, he said. They don't need touching. I noticed something then. Dark specks on the wall behind him. At first glance, they looked like stains. But when I blinked, They weren't in the same place. I've seen a lot of calm patients. Shock calm. Medication calm. The kind of calm that comes from dissociation. This wasn't that. Obadiah's calm felt intentional. His vitals were stable. Heart rate slow but steady. Temperature still slightly elevated. Not feverish, just warm. Too warm for someone who'd been outside all night. When the resident asked him standard intake questions, Obadiah answered politely. "Where are you staying?" "Wherever they allow." "Do you feel pain?" "No." "Do you feel unsafe?" "No." "Are you hearing voices?" "No." Every answer was technically appropriate, but the way he spoke, evenly spaced, carefully chosen, made it feel rehearsed, like he was translating something into language that wouldn't alarm us. I watched the wall again. The dark specks had spread, still faint, still subtle, like mold beginning to bloom, except mold doesn't relocate. When I stepped closer, the spot seemed to pull away from me, not fast, just enough. "Are you comfortable?" I asked. "Yes," Obadiah said. "They like it here." My throat tightened. "Who is they?" I asked again. He tilted his head. "The ones that live with me," he said. "They keep things balanced." I felt that word land wrong. Balanced. I checked the room's temperature gauge. Normal. But the air felt warmer near him, thicker, as if the space itself was occupied. The resident cleared his throat. "We're going to move you to isolation for observation," he said. "Just routine." Obadiah nodded. "That's fine," he said. "They don't mind small rooms." As the transport staff arrived, I noticed something else. Tiny marks on Obadiah's neck. Not bites, not bruises. Dots. Perfectly round. Faded. Like healed punctures. When the gurney rolled past me, I felt it again. That same sensation I'd felt earlier. Not movement. Presence. And for the first time since he arrived, I realized something was wrong in a very specific way. Obadiah wasn't calm because he felt safe. He was calm because he wasn't alone. That isolation was supposed to neutralize variables. Single room, negative pressure, no unnecessary contact. We moved Obadiah down the hall just before dawn, past rows of curtained bays and humming monitors. The isolation room was colder than the rest of the ER by design. Tile floors, bare walls, no windows. He lay back on the gurney without complaint. As the door sealed, the temperature sensor above the bed blinked, then blinked again. "Room's warming," the resident said, frowning at the monitor. "That's not possible," I replied. "Isolation runs cooler than standard." Within minutes, condensation began to form on the inside of the glass panel. Not steam. A fine sheen, like breath on a mirror. I adjusted the thermostat manually. It dropped, then climbed again. Obadiah watched all of this with mild interest. "They don't like being separated," he said gently. The heat wasn't uniform. It radiated outward from the bed in a slow gradient, hottest near his torso, cooler near the walls, as if the room were wrapped around something living. I felt sweat gather at the base of my neck. "Are you feeling warm?" I asked. "No," he replied. "They are." I glanced at the walls. The dark specks were back. More of them now. Not stains, not mold. They pulsed. Subtly. in and out, in rhythm with Obadiah's breathing. The resident took a step back. "That's not normal," he said. Obadiah smiled. "They're just stretching," he replied. "Being alone makes them restless." The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. I made a note in the chart I knew would be flagged later. Localized heat anomaly, visual disturbances on wall surfaces, patient calm, cooperative. I left the room with the door sealed behind me. The hallway felt cold by comparison, too cold. And as I walked away, I realized the heat hadn't followed him into isolation. It had followed us out. By mid-morning, the isolation room no longer looked empty. It looked occupied. The stains had spread. Not explosively. Not chaotically. They followed lines, corners of the ceiling, the seam where wall met floor, the outline of the electrical conduit running behind the drywall, darkened patches, uneven in shape, like old water damage. Except water damage doesn't move. I watched one of the spots change while I stood there, not crawling, not dripping, repositioning, as if whatever caused it was adjusting its weight. Environmental Services was called. The cleaner paused at the doorway, squinting. "Was this room used recently?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Why?" She shook her head. "Smells. Lived in," she said. "Like a basement someone never leaves." She didn't go inside. Obadiah noticed the stains immediately. "They're leaving marks," he said calmly. "They try not to." "Leaving marks of what?" the resident asked. "Where they rest," Obadiah replied. The heat had stabilized. Not normal temperature. Consistent temperature. Like the room had found a new baseline. The stains deepened near the bed. I stepped closer, careful not to touch the wall. The surface looked damp. But when I hovered my hand near it, I felt resistance. Not air, not heat. Density. Like placing your hand near a large animal without seeing it. "Do they live on you?" I asked. Obadiah considered this. "No," he said. "They live with me." The stain nearest the bed pulsed once. Slow. Deliberate. The resident whispered, "That's not moisture." No one corrected him. Because at this point, calling it stains felt dishonest. They weren't marks left behind. They were signs of presence. And whatever shared that room with Obadiah was starting to make itself comfortable. I was standing at the glass when it happened. Not all at once. Not dramatically. One of the stains shifted, just a few inches to the left. No smear. No trail. It simply relocated. The resident inhaled sharply. "Did you see that?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. Another patch followed. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. They weren't spreading. They were repositioning. Tracking. The movement wasn't random. It followed sound. When someone spoke near the door, the stains nearest the glass drifted closer. When the hallway went quiet, they settled back toward the bed. Obadiah watched with mild concern. "They're curious," he said. "You don't get visitors often when you live outside." The overhead light flickered again. This time, it stayed dimmer. I stepped back instinctively. The stain nearest the floor elongated, thinning at one end. It looked wrong. Not liquid. Not solid. Like a shadow learning how to take up space. "Are they alive?" the resident asked. Obadiah frowned slightly. That's not the right word, he said. They're dependent. On you? Yes. And what happens, I asked carefully, if you're not here? The room felt tighter. The stains stilled. Obadiah looked up at me then, really looked. They get hungry, he said, and they look for someone else. The patch nearest the door shifted again. Closer. Not to Obadiah. To us. I reached for the intercom. We need infectious disease down here, I said. And facilities. And the words cut off as the stain on the glass panel pressed forward. Not touching. Just close enough to fog the glass from the inside. A shape formed briefly. Not a face. An impression. Like something leaning its weight against the barrier. Obadiah's voice softened. Easy, he murmured. They're just stretching their awareness. I realized then, isolation wasn't containing them. It was concentrating them. And whatever lived with Obadiah was no longer content to stay unnoticed. It wasn't a sudden realization. It was worse than that. It was gradual. My eyes began to adjust. At first I thought the lights were dimming again. Then I thought it was exhaustion, a trick of a double shift and too little sleep. But the stains were changing. They weren't just dark patches anymore. They had depth. Layers. When I focused on one long enough, it stopped looking like a mark on the wall and started looking like something in front of it. Not fully here, not fully separate, like condensation taking shape around an invisible body. I leaned closer to the glass, and then I saw the outline. Not a creature, not a single form. Multiple presences overlapping. Thin, elongated silhouettes pressed against the wall as if standing sideways, occupying the smallest possible footprint. They weren't attached to Obadiah. They were anchored to him. Their edges shimmered faintly, not with light, but with distortion, the way heat bends air above asphalt. My stomach dropped. "Oh my God," the resident whispered beside me. "They're not stains." "No," I said. "They're standing." The shapes shifted again. One of them leaned toward the glass, and for the first time, I understood what had been wrong all along. They weren't watching us. They were watching through us, using our reflections, our movement, our presence. Obadiah closed his eyes. "You weren't supposed to see them yet," he said softly. "Yet?" I asked. "They usually hide better," he replied. "But hospitals are loud. So many bodies. So much warmth." The shape nearest the door elongated. Its outline thinned until it almost vanished. Then it appeared again, closer. I took a step back. "Can they leave the room?" the resident asked. Obadiah opened his eyes. "They don't like to," he said. "But they can." The stain on the glass shifted. This time, it wasn't curious. It was assessing. And something in me, something deep and instinctive, realized that once you see them, you become part of what they can see too. The incident happened faster than I expected. Not violently, efficiently. A resident from infectious disease entered the room without waiting for clearance. He was already irritated, overworked, skeptical, running on caffeine and protocol. "This ends now," he said, stepping past the threshold. "We're moving him upstairs. Full decon." The moment his foot crossed the doorway, the room reacted. The heat spiked. Not everywhere. Around Obadiah. The shapes pulled inward, condensed. What had been stretched along the walls folded back toward the bed, collapsing into themselves like shadows retreating from sudden light. The resident reached for Obadiah's arm. "Sir, you need to—" He never finished the sentence. The air between them thickened. Not solid. Not invisible. Resistant. His hand stopped inches from Obadiah's skin. He frowned and pushed harder. That was when the shapes surged. Not outward. Around. The resident cried out as if burned, stumbling backward, clutching his wrist. I saw the marks immediately. Not burns. Pressure imprints. 5 elongated impressions wrapping around his forearm, too narrow and too long to be human fingers. They faded within seconds. The resident staggered into the hallway, gasping. "I didn't touch him," he said, panic rising. "I swear I didn't touch him." Obadiah remained calm. "They don't like sudden removal," he said quietly. "They've learned that loss is dangerous." The shapes loosened again, spreading back into the walls, ceiling, floor, guarding, encircling. I understood then. They weren't parasites. They weren't predators. They were defensive. Anything that threatened Obadiah's stability, isolation, movement, separation. They answered it. Automatically. Relentlessly. "He's not infected," I said, my voice tight. "He's protected." Obadiah met my eyes. "They keep me alive," he said, "and I keep them fed." The shapes pulsed softly, satisfied. The decision was made above our heads. It always is. Administration wanted him moved. Psych wanted him sedated. Facilities wanted the room sealed and scrubbed. Too many unknowns. Too much liability. 2 security officers were called. They stood outside the isolation room, broad-shouldered, hands resting near their belts, pretending this was routine. "Sir," one of them said through the intercom, "we're going to relocate you to another unit." Obadiah looked at the glass, then at the shapes. They were already changing, not spreading, tightening. The stains pulled inward, thickening, darkening, compressing into narrower silhouettes that clung close to the bed and the doorway. "They don't want to move," Obadiah said gently, "and neither do I." "That's not your decision," the second guard replied, reaching for the door release. The moment the seal broke, the room exhaled. Not air. Pressure. The lights dimmed. Monitors flickered. The temperature dropped sharply in the hallway, while the isolation room surged hotter. The first guard stepped inside. He made it 2 steps, then stopped. His posture changed. Shoulders jerking back, arms stiff at his sides, like invisible hands had grabbed him by the joints. "Hey," he said, laughing nervously. "What's—" The shapes moved, not toward him, around him. They flowed up the walls and ceiling, then folded down behind him, enclosing his body in a loose vertical cage. He screamed as something pressed into his chest, not crushing, holding, pinning him in place without touching the floor. The second guard rushed forward. The door slammed shut on its own. The shapes surged again. The glass fogged completely. Inside the room, the guard's scream cut off abruptly. Silence followed. Then, a single wet cough. The door slid open. The guard fell forward onto the hallway floor, gasping, shaking, eyes wide with shock. No marks, no bruises, just one thing wrong. When I helped him sit up, I saw it. On his sternum, a dark imprint. Not a hand, not fingers. A cluster of overlapping pressure points, as if several bodies had leaned into him at once. Obadiah hadn't moved. He sat calmly on the gurney. "They don't like threats," he said softly. "They remember when we were hunted." The shapes relaxed again, spreading, watching, and everyone in that hallway understood the same thing at the same time. This wasn't escalation. This was restraint. They could have done worse. They chose not to. It didn't spread like an infection. There was no cough, no blood, no contact tracing. It spread like awareness, like heat finding colder air. The first sign was subtle. A nurse in triage paused mid-sentence and pressed her palm against the wall. She frowned, confused. "Does it feel warmer here?" she asked. Another nurse nodded slowly. "I thought it was just me." By noon, the dark patches had appeared outside isolation. Not obvious, not alarming. Just faint discolorations along the baseboards. Corners. Behind supply carts. Easy to ignore if you weren't looking for them. But I was. And once you notice them, you can't stop. They followed Obadiah's path, the route from intake to isolation. The hallway turns, the places where his gurney had paused, as if something had brushed the building and decided to stay. The shapes were thinner now, less defined, distributed, no longer clustered around one host. "They're learning the space," Obadiah said when I asked him about it. "Learning how?" I said. "How to exist without being noticed," he replied. Facilities tried to scrub the walls. The stains didn't smear. They withdrew, returning an hour later in slightly different positions. Environmental logged it as humidity issues. Engineering blamed insulation. No one wanted another word for it. A resident complained of feeling watched in the medication room. Another swore the wall behind the nurse's station breathed. No one laughed. Not after the guard. Obadiah watched it all unfold with quiet focus. "They won't take much," he said. "Just enough to anchor." "Anchor to what?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "To life," he said. "To warmth. To movement." I realized then what colonization meant. They weren't spreading from him. They were spreading with him. The ER wasn't contaminated. It was being shared. By late afternoon, the ER no longer felt like a hospital. It felt occupied, not overrun, not attacked, claimed. The temperature readings were erratic. Some rooms dropped 5 degrees for no reason. Others felt suffocating, despite normal readings on the monitors. IV pumps malfunctioned and corrected themselves. Heart monitors skipped a beat, then stabilized. Always near the same areas, always where the stains had been. Administration arrived in force. Infection control. Facilities. Risk management. They stood in a tight circle near the nurse's station, speaking in low voices, glancing too often toward isolation. I heard fragments. Unexplainable. Liability. Not documentable. Get him out. Cordelia didn't argue. That's what frightened me most. She was the kind of nurse who fought physicians, administrators, anyone if she thought a patient was being mishandled. But this time, she just nodded. "He's not sick," she said quietly. And we're not equipped for this. They didn't say Obadiah's name when they made the decision. They called it a discharge. No psych hold. No transfer. Just removal. I was sent in to prepare him. He was sitting exactly where I'd left him, hands folded, back straight, eyes calm. They told you, he said before I spoke. Yes, I admitted. We're letting you go. A pause, then a nod. They don't want to be here anymore either, he said. They? I asked. He glanced around the room. They know when they're unwelcome. I swallowed. What happens if you leave? I asked. To the hospital. He considered it. They'll retract, he said. Most of them. Most. And the rest? His eyes met mine. They'll remember the way back. I felt something cold settle in my chest. You knew this would happen, I said. Obadiah smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. Hospitals are crossroads, he said. Warm, busy, full of decay and healing at the same time. Perfect. They wanted to see if you'd notice. Did we pass? I asked. Yes, he said. You did. Security arrived to escort him out. As he stood, the room changed. The air eased. The pressure lifted. The stains on the walls began to fade, not vanish, but thin, like breath on glass. As he reached the door, Obadiah paused. They like you, he said softly. You listen. I don't want that, I said. He tilted his head. They don't care what we want. Then he stepped into the hallway, and something unseen followed. They walked him out through the ambulance bay. Not the front entrance. No paperwork in his hands. No discharge instructions. Just Obadiah, barefoot in hospital-issued socks, moving calmly between two security guards, who looked relieved to be anywhere but near him. The moment the automatic doors slid open, the air shifted. I felt it before I saw it. A pressure release, like a storm passing without rain. The warmth that had lingered in my skin all day finally broke. The hum I hadn't realized I'd been hearing went silent. Behind us, inside the ER, monitors stabilized. The stains on the walls didn't disappear completely, but they stopped moving. Obadiah paused at the threshold, not because anyone stopped him, because they did. For just a second, the air around him distorted like heat rising from asphalt. I blinked hard. When I looked again, it was gone. Will they follow you? I asked. He shook his head. Not all of them. My stomach tightened. Where will you go? Somewhere warm, he said. Somewhere crowded? I realized then that he had never said safe. One of the guards opened the door wider. Obadiah stepped out into the cold. The moment he crossed the line from hospital tile to concrete, something let go. I felt it physically, a sensation like fingers lifting from my spine. The lights above the ambulance bay flickered once, then steadied. Obadiah turned back. His eyes met mine for the last time. They'll remember this place, he said, and they'll remember you. Then he smiled, not reassuring, not threatening, just factual. And he walked away into the night. By the time the doors slid shut, the hospital felt empty. Not quiet. Empty. Like something had been removed that shouldn't have been there, but had already left traces behind. The ER returned to protocol. That's what administration called it. Rooms were sanitized again, equipment recalibrated, incident reports filed with careful language, environmental irregularities, unexplained system fluctuations, resolved. No mention of heat, no mention of movement, no mention of anything alive. By the next morning, most of the staff convinced themselves it had been exhaustion, stress, group panic. I tried to do the same. It didn't work, because the traces didn't leave with him. 3 hours into my next shift, I noticed the first one, a small, dark spot on the inside of my wrist. Not a bruise, not a rash. It looked like a freckle I didn't remember having. When I pressed on it, there was no pain. But there was heat. Localized. Focused. Like a tiny ember under my skin. Over the next week, more appeared. Always in warm places. Inside the elbow. Behind the knee. Along the ribs. They never spread. They never changed shape. They just stayed. I went to occupational health. Blood work came back normal. No infection. No allergic response. Probably stress-related pigmentation, the nurse said, not meeting my eyes. I stopped asking, because other things started happening. I stopped getting sick. Not once. Flu went through the department, half the staff out. I worked double shifts, no symptoms. A patient coughed blood in my face. Nothing. I cut my finger on broken glass during a trauma. The wound closed before I could find a bandage. I started feeling it then. Not thoughts, not voices. Awareness. In warm, enclosed spaces especially. Supply closets. Elevators, isolation rooms, a sense of company, not watching, present. And once, just once, I felt something move, not under my skin, around it, like a current adjusting to my position. I remembered Obadiah's words. They've marked you, not in a bad way. I stopped doing isolation duty after that. I told Cordelia it made me anxious. She didn't question it. She never looked at my arms. But sometimes, when the ward was quiet, I caught her staring at the walls, as if she too was checking for stains that shouldn't be there. I didn't understand what protection meant until the night it mattered. It was a code blue in trauma too. Young male. Massive internal bleeding. Blood everywhere. We were working fast, bodies packed tight around the bed. Someone shoved past me too hard. I slipped, fell backward toward the corner of a metal supply cart. I remember thinking, this is going to hurt. I never hit it. Something stopped me. Not hands. Not a push. Pressure. The air itself seemed to resist my movement, just for a fraction of a second. Long enough to throw my balance forward instead of back. I landed on my knees, shaken, uninjured. No one noticed. Later, in the locker room, I checked myself. No bruises. No soreness. Just warmth along my spine. Another night, a patient became violent. Psych hold. 6'3", high on something we couldn't identify. He swung at me, missed. Not because he hesitated, because his arm veered, like it had been redirected. He stared at his own hand afterward, confused. I didn't mean to, he said quietly. I stopped standing near doors, stopped leaning against walls. I didn't need to. Things seemed to adjust around me. Small things, subtle things. Enough. I never felt threatened again in the ER. Tired, yes. Overworked, always. But never unsafe. And that terrified me more than any patient ever had, because protection implies judgment, choice, something deciding that I mattered. I began to notice patterns. When someone raised their voice near me, the air felt heavier. Arguments died out faster. Equipment failures stopped happening when I entered a room. Once, during a power fluctuation, the lights flickered everywhere, except above my station. I started sleeping with the window open, even in winter. The cold made it easier to think, easier to breathe. Warmth made them closer. I didn't know how I knew that. I just did. Obadiah said they were considerate guests, that they protected their host. He never said what happened to people who weren't hosts, or to places that refused them. Sometimes when I pass the negative pressure room, I feel a faint resistance, like a memory pressing back, like something remembering where it once lived. I don't go inside. I don't need to. I'm already carrying enough. I still work nights. I tell people it's because the pay is better, because I'm used to it, because someone has to. That's all true. But it's not the reason. The reason is that at night, you can feel the hospital breathing. Day shifts are loud, crowded, chaotic. Noise hides things. At night, there are gaps, spaces between sounds, between footsteps, between heartbeats. That's when you notice it. How rooms are never truly still. How warmth gathers even when no one is inside. How certain corners feel occupied. I used to believe empty meant safe. Now I know better. Empty just means quiet. Sometimes when I finish charting and the ER is calm, I walk past the old isolation room, the one Obadiah stayed in. They repainted it, replaced the ventilation system, updated the door. But the temperature is always a few degrees higher inside. Maintenance says it's a sensor issue. I don't argue. I stand in the doorway sometimes, just for a second. I feel nothing aggressive, nothing hostile, just presence, waiting, observing, learning the building, learning us. Obadiah said they liked contained spaces. He said hospitals were ideal environments, constant warmth, constant decay, constant healing. He said they were considerate guests, and maybe they are. Maybe they've always been. I've started to notice how many people avoid being alone now, how often patients say they feel watched, how many staff complain about rooms feeling off. They laugh it off. Call it stress. Call it imagination. That's what I did too. Before. Sometimes during particularly cold nights, I feel them pull back, just a little. And I realize something I wish I hadn't. They don't need Obadiah anymore. They don't need one host. They don't need permission. They just need space, warmth, containment. And humans are very good at building all three. I still check the locks before I leave. Still keep my apartment cool. Still avoid enclosed, heated spaces when I can. But I've stopped telling myself I'm alone, because I'm not. None of us are. Not in hospital rooms, not in closets, not in elevators, not even in our own bodies. Rooms are never empty. They're just waiting to be noticed. And once you notice, you can never unfeel what's standing quietly beside you.